Hello and welcome to StratNews Global. I'm Parul Chandra, and with me today is Velina Tchakarova. She heads the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, and she's based in Vienna. Welcome to StratNews Global, Velina. And let me begin by asking you what is the lockdown situation in Austria?
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. And yes, it's my first time being with you, so I'm really glad to answer all your questions. Starting with a question about the lockdown. Here in Austria, it was announced on the March 9th, officially by the government. Well, it took most of the people by surprise. It was one of the European countries that responded very quickly and very swiftly, introducing right from the start very strict, restrictive measures. So basically, we are still in a lockdown situation here in Austria. That means gatherings of more than 5 people are prohibited. We only go out for very important reasons. One of them, shopping, that means going to the groceries is allowed, but only if necessary, or if we have to help a neighbor who belongs to one of the risk groups, for instance, older people, and we have to provide for them, then it's also allowed. But basically system relevant jobs such as police or medical personnel, these people are allowed to go to their jobs, to their work, but most of us are still in a home office situation or in the so-called Kurzarbeit, that is short, so to say. I don't know how exactly to translate it. It's basically most of the people are not fired, but they stay at home and waiting till the situation gets eased. And yes, and we have actually a situation that is going to last now officially not early than the end of April. That means the restrictions that I've named are still in place until the end of April, but the expectation is that they're going to be prolonged for at least another month. Schools, universities are closed, and are going to be closed until mid of May. For sure, public gatherings and events are banned until the end of June. So basically, it's a real lockdown situation here in Austria, and more or less similar measures have been introduced early or later in other European countries.
Now, because you've been watching the European scene and following it so closely, how do you see the fact that the European countries themselves don't seem to be united in their fight against the pandemic? Uh, for instance, there have been reports that Germany is not willing to help other smaller nations or those nations that are in a bigger crisis than they are. How do you see that? And also connected to this, there is this proposal to have these corona bonds, and that also seems to have divided Europe, with the North uh, not supporting
Against
it.
the South.
Yeah, the Germany or
Yeah.
Holland, whereas the South, Italy, France, they're pushing for these bonds.
When we talk about the COVID-19 crisis, I see it as interplay of 3 important layers. On the one side, it is the health emergency, the pandemic, and how each of the European countries, but not only the European countries, each of the countries globally, so worldwide, are responding to it, because it's a global pandemic at this point. So this is the one layer. Then we have the layer of the economic repercussions. So this is going to be a huge shock to the systems, not only in Europe, but also in other parts of the world.
Worldwide.
And then we have the third layer, which is now the layer of information campaigns of certain countries strengthening certain authoritarian rules and modes of governance. So we have all these three layers put in place. So when it comes to the pandemic, to the response of the pandemic, like I said, the European Union countries, so the European countries basically started acting on its own right from the start. But we have to be also clear about it that the health systems and also crisis response systems are actually a matter of national not only sovereignty but responsibility. So basically the role of the institutions in the case of Europe, such as the European Commission, such as the European Parliament and other institutions, is actually more or less a coordinative one rather than leading. So that has to be clear right from the start. When there were articles or calls about the lack of European solidarity, when we say lack of European solidarity right at the beginning of the crisis, when it hit here, well, we talk about the period of the end of February and beginning of March. This is when it started really hitting the old continent. So when we talk about this, it's more about a lack of solidarity on the side of the European member states, on the side of the European nations at the beginning, which then again, a few weeks later, of course, they started coordinating and they started helping each other. So that's not the case that there is, sorry, lack of any coordination or lack of any, solidarity. But of course, on the other side, there were plenty of articles pointing to the help, to the aid, to the deliveries of other, so to say, third countries. And this is what I mean by the layer of information campaigns. When certain countries try to put themselves in a positive light amid the crisis. One of them, of course, China, with the so-called mask diplomacy. Yes, so basically this was, in fact, in reality, countries such as France or Germany delivered as much masks as China, but of course the medial influence, or let's say certain campaigns created a different picture. That was the one thing. The other thing was, of course, that some of these deliveries were actually not helpful because they didn't fit certain European Union standards. You know that we are a common market. We have certain standards for every sector, and this applied also to medical equipment. And some of these deliveries were just not, used because they didn't fit the European Union standards. So in reality, there was coordination at institutional level. Whether efficient enough or not is going to be assessed. Okay. Certainly, it was not the layer most responsible for pandemic crisis. That's for sure. Now, what you've mentioned, what comes, is the third layer. What is going to happen with the European economies? And here we have now an old situation. It's not the first time that we had such, crisis times. Certainly, it's going to be much broader than the Greek debt crisis in 2015. And certainly, there are old conflict lines being revived now, like you've mentioned, North versus South. Yeah. Now we have a block of countries such as Spain, Italy, that are trying to introduce these so-called Corona bonds. They want or they demand from the European Union member states, from the Eurogroup states, kind of a new response to the crisis, because their economies are going to be hit really badly. Yes, some assessments show up to 10-15% of the GDP, which of course now coupled with the serious health systems pressure they already witnessing is going to be devastating for their populations. And now it's all a matter, once again, of a very typical European problem of finding a compromise, because all solutions are based on that mechanism. And right now we are in this situation where part of the member states do not want to introduce these new bonds, so to say,
yes,
euro bonds. And part of the country, these are of course countries such as Germany, such as Netherlands, Austria is also part of this bloc. But on the other side, there are the countries in the south demand more mechanisms, different mechanisms than the usual ones. And I'm convinced that there's going to be probably a third way in the end. We are still not, I don't have a solution for you right now. They are still in the process of finding a compromise. They couldn't agree on a declaration yesterday, on a solution yesterday. So we have to wait for the next round of talks.
So let's hope that they are able to reach some kind of resolution of this issue. Now, Velina, you mentioned China, and of course, that's where the the COVID-19 virus and the pandemic began. How do you see China's current role in the crisis? Because they've been able to beat the pandemic, well, almost, and now they are seeking to turn the tide in their favor by saying that, okay, reaching out to countries with medical equipment, masks, medical personnel. So what is your reading of their actions?
Well, my reading of their actions is as follows. On the one side, I see their reaction also as, the reaction in January as delayed. I suppose that it took quite some time till they actually came out with, centralized decision, let's put it that way. So it took certainly weeks, or probably even a month, or now reports are coming regarding that matter. Why? Because, we have a very different system. For most of the people outside of China, who are not familiar with that kind of a system, one-party system, it's difficult to understand that what it means when it comes to decision making. But I think that this one-party system was also part of the problem, because at the local level we have, of course, people who are basically party members trying to mitigate the effects. So probably they were trying to mitigate the effects. That's my reading. They were trying to mitigate the effects in the hope that it's not going to escalate, that the virus outbreak will be mitigated, right? And at some point it went out of control. So it was necessary for centralized decision. That was when basically on January 23rd, the government made the official announcement that compulsory masks are to be introduced, restrictive measures, all this quarantine, and we know all the the whole spectrum of measures. My point is that it took quite some time until the 23rd, so they wasted a valuable time. And for us, for the other parts of the world, it was also basically a wasted time, because because most of the governments downscaled. Yes, they just downscaled the risks coming out from this pandemic. Then again, I see also the reaction of the World Health Organization at that time as part of the problem, because they were trying to basically spread the message of no trade, no travel restrictions are needed. Let me remind you that we actually had in the January, until the end of January, when the first travel restrictions were introduced here in Europe, we had a situation where actually there was no real perceived risk of or perceived necessity of having to restrict travel or trade from with Asia or from Asia. So and with or from China. So that was one point. Next point, of course, is that once it became obvious that it's actually a serious
Pandemic.
virus outbreak,
Yeah,
it's a
the
serious
WHO
pandemic.
finally declared it a pandemic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when this happened, of course, yes, it's true that the restrictive measures that were introduced helped a lot, and actually, well, prevented the virus from spreading to other parts in regions in China, but it didn't prevent the virus from spreading to other parts of the world. So
Yeah.
that's the reality I see. And now, of course, in this stage now, I mean, late March, beginning of April, I see the efforts by, you know, diplomats and by the whole, you know, spectrum of basically of layers within the Chinese, you know, state to basically create this narrative that they are now, of course, helping the world to cope
Yes.
with the crisis, and
Yes.
basically are, you know, not only supplying medical equipment, not only helping wherever it's needed, but basically there was also some efforts I found very troubling, like the case with trying to put the blame for the virus outbreak on the US
Yes.
on the US government and basically on US institutions. This is what I mentioned in the beginning, that we have three layers in this process, and we have now the layer also of information campaigns, you know, governments that try basically to capitalize on the crisis, on the COVID-19 crisis, by placing a certain narrative, specifically in countries with weak institutions and with, you know, with not so good governance, let's put it that way. This is going to be easier to do it, right?
Yeah.
So this is also something that is happening now in Europe. We are
Yes.
observing this trend here in Europe as well.
On that note, thank you so much for talking to Strat News.
Thank you for having me. Like I said, I wish India and the people in India to not only much health, but also to cope with the lockdown measures that were introduced. And I see a great future for India. So it's going to be a role that is going to grow bigger and bigger for India, not only in South Asia, but also in the world. And that's why I see actually a lot of interesting things coming out from your region.